In the last video that I did, I was going over the first publicly released game that I did. And I'm doing a series where I'm going to be playing every game I release publicly. Last week it was the Infiltrator beta demo. This week it's the Infiltrator Deathmatch. Now, the reason why this is the second game that we released is because the very first game series we intended to do, this was me and my brother, was the Infiltrator series. And it was essentially a top-down shooter series that was going to have something like a single-player mode and then a multiplayer component to it. The last game was heavily inspired by GoldenEye, and this game was mostly inspired by Perfect Dark, which was also made by Rare, who made GoldenEye. This is actually just the multiplayer component of what was supposed to be a full version of the Infiltrator game. And even this multiplayer component was still a very basic representation of what we were going for with the multiplayer. For anyone who's played Perfect Dark for the Nintendo 64, you'll know that it had an extreme amount of customization with the options. Even to this day, you could customize the guns, you could customize the enemies, you could customize what they look like. That was something that we were going to go for in this game, but it was very scaled back because doing that would have taken much longer, would have had to make more complicated interfaces. So this is basically like a preview to the Infiltrator. In today's terms, this is essentially what a lot of developers are doing now, where they'll release alphas of their game development to show people what's going on. A few projects like this that you might have heard of are things like Project Zomboid. Minecraft is another game that started out with the alpha model. There's a lot of games that are doing it these days. And this is something that I probably should have done for a lot of my future games, that had I have just planned a little bit differently, it really wouldn't have taken me much more work to actually get out demos of the games that I was working on. And these are games that aren't on the website, like a computer hacking game, another RPG, things like that. What I'm going to do here is go to the game, and you can see I still have preference misspelled here. So let's open this up. That intro was basically us ushering in the newest GZ Storm logo. It was showing the old logo getting shot and then the new one coming up. If you look at the credits here, you can see the another rendition of this logo. This looks similar to what we have today. And you can see here that a lot of my criticisms I had in the original Infiltrator beta demo are addressed here. I just simply listed my name, my brother's name, and the things that we did, just to keep it simple. The interface in this game actually is quite improved over the previous game. And as a whole, from a functional standpoint, I'd say works pretty well. I think the only real problem with it is the inconsistency. Some of these graphics I don't really think fit together. If you notice, I'll go to the options here. You can see that there's just so many different graphical styles here, and it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense why there isn't more consistency here. Now, I'd probably say the biggest flaw in this game, which you can see here with the controls, is, well, the controls. This game employed a two-handed gun system, where each hand could equip a gun. Now, this would work reasonably well if I was using mouse controls, but this is actually entirely controlled by your keyboard. The mouse isn't used at all, and that's a big problem. And the reason why there is no mouse controls is because I'll show you through the test mode here, which you can see that you can only go 4 directions here. The reason why that is because there was no hardware rotation. Essentially, you had to pre-rotate all the sprites and save those sprites, which meant when I'm going up, down, left, and right here, I needed a sprite, let's say the head, for instance. I needed to have 4 head sprites. When what normally is done is you have one head sprite, and then the hardware simply rotates it depending on which angle you're looking at. So having something like 360-degree movement really wasn't a consideration. It just wasn't possible. And if I were to have mouse movement, it just wouldn't translate because it could only lock the 4 directions, and it really wouldn't be that intuitive. Now, it could be argued that I could have thrown it in anyways, and it might still be better than the keyboard controls. But I just felt that I didn't feel that it worked, so I just went straight up with the keyboard controls. Now, this test room I have here, I actually use in quite a few of my games. This is something that it's an idea that for some reason I like, where you can set the controls and you can go into a test room and you can test it. I haven't really had a lot of opportunities, though, to use this because a lot of my games, I didn't even bother with custom controls, or I simply didn't put it in the game. Now, you can very slightly see that when I click this button, you can see there's dithering in the background where there is a black pixel, there's a transparent pixel, there's a black pixel, there's a transparent pixel, and it keeps doing that for the background. It's to simulate transparency. That's another limitation that there was in GameMaker 5 where there was no alpha blending. And, well, there was alpha blending, but it was extremely slow. So this was something that I did to subvert that. It looks reasonable, but it's really not a substitute for true alpha blending. And I had these help controls here just to make it very obvious what everything does. I think from the previous game, I wanted to make sure, because I really didn't like the interface in the original game, which was very bad. I wanted to make sure that everything was smooth and made sense, and I really put a focus on that. I spent quite a bit of time on the interface for this game. Even though it is reasonable, still, like I said, it's not consistent. Some of the placement of things, it really doesn't make sense. But overall, I'd say from a functional standpoint, it really does work. Now, in this game, there's a cheat code that you can enable by pressing the F key, I think, 25 times. I'm going to enable both of these options just so it's easier to commentate while I'm playing the game. Now, when you go to exhibition mode, which is essentially the only real mode in the game here, you can see, again, more options. The only thing, speaking of the interface, that was confusing was friendly fire. If you click this button here, it says, when enabled, teammates will not be able to hurt each other. This does not make sense. If I have this clicked, it says, teammates will not be able to hurt each other. But you'd think a check mark next to friendly fire would suggest that they can hurt each other. This was something that I did get wrong, and I should have had it the other way around. I think, in general, I could have had a better system of turning options on or off, but that's just what I had at the time. So I'm going to turn friendly fire off. Well, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to do a deathmatch right now. And basically what you could do is you could enable the bots. Gray means that they're off. It says here. You can see. But I'm going to play with 8 bots. And I'm going to put the difficulty to hard. And let's play on Battleground. So, looking at the interface again, you can see that it all makes sense at the bottom. You can see the ammo, you can see the health, you can see what guns you're holding. But again, the consistency, the graphics really don't look consistent. And then there's another problem that I have here. Next to the health and the armor bar is this square box with a stick figure in it. That was supposed to symbolize the player. And you could enable run. You can see I'm toggling it on and off right now. You could turn running on or off. Now, in this game, there's really no point to ever walk. The only reason why walking even exists is because in the full version of the game, I was going to have... It was a game where you could sneak around, so walking actually made sense because you don't want to make noise, and on top of that, it improves your accuracy. But in this game, it's a deathmatch. There's really no reason why you'd ever not want to run. And then I also have the strafing, which if you can see the stick figure changes and it shows that you're strafing. The enemies in this game are pretty basic. They just have... The AI in this game, I think, is just... They more or less go for the nearest enemy, and occasionally they'll go for power-ups. It's extremely basic. At the time, I really didn't know anything about AI programming. I still really don't. Not many games I've made don't really have sophisticated AI systems. If you notice that when I'm walking here, I'm leaving a blood trail. And I had bleeding in this game, which was also in the previous game. If you look at the health gauge, very slightly you can see the health bar is decreasing. This was another thing that meant a lot more in the full game, because you could conceivably shoot an enemy a couple of times, run away, and just wait for them to die. But in a game like this deathmatch, you're dying so quickly, it really doesn't play much of a part into it, unless you get shot a lot of times. So, it's good to have it in there, but it really doesn't... You really don't get to see the use of it, because it's so... Most people probably wouldn't even know that there is the blood loss if they were playing this game. In terms of a goal for this game, there really is no goal. It's just to show the multiplayer system. And one of the ideas that we were going to do is, much like Perfect Dark, we were going to have challenges and other components to the multiplayer, so that it wasn't just these exhibitions. But again, doing challenges, adding extra things, that would have taken time. And this game already took it took long enough as is. I think this game took something like 4 months, and I don't know if that was working on it really regularly or just on and off, but it did take quite a while to do this. Once again, this game has the same problem with the textures on the ground. If you look, you can see it looks like a kaleidoscope. This is supposed to be a desert, but it looks like a weird rug. These are palm trees here, but the textures on this are pretty bad. And that's probably, again, a big flaw in this game. The biggest flaw, I think, is the controls, and the second biggest flaw is these textures. I don't think it would have been that difficult to make the textures better, and I think it would have greatly improved the game, but that's just something that you just learn over time. So I'm done with this mode here. You can see all the scores there. I'm going to do a team deathmatch at bases. And I'll make sure that teammates cannot hurt each other. Once again, the kaleidoscope backgrounds. Now, something that just is a little complaint. If I press the primary fire button, it will shoot the machine gun. And this is a two-handed weapon. But if I press the secondary button, it won't fire. Now, that doesn't make any sense. There's no reason why the secondary button shouldn't also fire, because this is a two-handed weapon. These maps didn't really take long at all to make, and it kind of surprises me that there was only 5 maps in this game and why they're so basic, because I really don't think it would have been that hard to make better maps. I don't think it really would have been that hard to make better maps with more in them, but I think one of the problems was the pathfinding. The big problem with GameMaker is that interpreting lines of code takes it a very long time. But the internal systems of GameMaker actually are very quick. Things like drawing sprites